Hello, time for another Man in Gray book review. Today's book is Polar Bear by Margery Fee, published by Reaktion Books in 2019. It's 224 pages. This is part of the Reaktion Book Animal Series. If you're a literary person, you like to read novels and short stories and poems, and you like going to movies and seeing plays, but you're also interested in animals and biology to a degree, well, this is the perfect book series for you because these books combine biology with the humanities. It's not just, here's these species and so forth. It gives you the natural history, but it also combines that with the arts. And so I'm going to explain, using this book as an example, I'm going to kind of explain how this book series works. The first chapter is called Early Encounters, and it talks about how humans first came into contact with polar bears, the natives who lived in the far north along with European explorers. And there's a painting here from 1906, which shows a guy, you can see that, heroically battling a polar bear, right? So the opening chapters kind of introduces how humans and polar bears have interacted, usually to the polar bear's detriment. The second chapter is the biology part. It's a chapter that goes through the natural history of polar bears, their evolution, their range, their mating behavior, their feeding behavior, and so forth. So that's more of the sciencey part. There's even a little illustration here that's it's called Polar Bear Scorecard, a standardized fatness index. And it tells you, as you look at this, it will show you whether the polar bear is starving or whether it's well fed or whether it's hungry or so forth. And these posters are actually put out in areas where polar bears come in contact with humans because it gives you an idea of how dangerous they are. If they're starving, if they're really hungry, they're probably going to try to get food from your garbage, or maybe even break into your house. There's been stories about that. So that's part of the biology part of the book. Then there's a chapter on the 19th century. The explorers who came in contact with polar bears in the 19th century began killing them for their hides and so forth. And but they also were some of the first naturalists who described polar bear behavior and began to do scientific studies of them, and of course taking hides and skeletons of the polar bear back, putting them in museums. And then so that's a little bit of history. And then the fourth chapter is on basically on advertising, marketing, and art, how the polar bear has been used to market various things. Here's a poster for the Brookfield Zoo from 1936. You see that polar bears, always some of the more popular zoo animals. Here's one from a circus in Berlin from 1966, where polar bears were used as circus animals. And then there's things on various advertisements that used polar bears and so forth on there. So how polar bears have been marketed. Then there's a chapter on indigenous peoples and their relationship with polar bears, particularly those in Alaska and Canada, the Inuit and the Aleut peoples. Here's one. This is a photograph from 1999, which shows some natives there with some polar bear hides. So it talks about how important the polar bear is to the traditional life of these native peoples. And then the final chapter is called Save the Polar Bear, and it's about, of course, the effect that climate change has had on the polar bear's possible extinction. And it talks about efforts that are being made to preserve polar bears, some of which are more controversial than others. But it's basically the attempt by people to try to save polar bears before they become extinct. And it goes into the questions about how realistic that is and so forth. And then at the very end, there's a timeline which kind of summarizes the entire book. And I think, me personally, I think it's a good idea to actually start with this. Go to the back of the book and read over the timeline. It goes from the prehistoric times to the present, and it basically summarizes the information in just a few paragraphs in the book. And then when you read the book, it'll kind of fit together better. There's also, of course, a lot of notes. There's a section here of there's a bibliography, and there's a section that lists associations and websites. So you can go online and learn about polar bears, and then there's various groups that are trying to preserve them, so forth. And as you can tell in here, these books are heavily illustrated. This one has over 100 illustrations, and majority of them are in color. So you don't have to read more than a couple of pages before there's an illustration. And they're very well made. They're paperback books, but they'll hold together pretty well. They have sewn bindings, so they won't fall apart after one reading. So if you are interested in polar bears and you're also kind of an artsy person, you'll really enjoy these books because it kind of, as I said, it combines biology of the polar bear with various artistic portrayals, and there's a little bit of history as well, and anthropology and so forth. So I find these books really intriguing because they're different from a lot of standard animal books, because it goes beyond just the standard natural history of them, although that is in there too. The book is called Polar Bear. The author is Margery Fee. This has been another Man in Gray book review. Thanks for watching.